So I'm Azzem Azhar. I'm the founder of Exponential View and an investor in early stage AI startups as well. And what I want to do is bring together and focus a couple of the very important points that Peter raised in his presentation. Let's come back to what we're actually seeing within generative AI, which is that ChatGPT is now a $10 billion a year consumer product. It launched in November 2022 as a test. Sam Altman was expecting 100,000 people, which is frankly nothing, to sign up for it, and now we're approaching 1 billion people using it every month, and you can see that inflection point at $10 billion. Let's be clear about this. This is not some non-technology being pushed by a vendor like the metaverse or like hydrogen. This is literally a product that people want and voluntarily pay for. And it's not the only one. Claude is from Anthropic, is running at $3 billion in revenue now. It was at a $1 billion run rate 5 months ago. So there's enormous consumer and enormous business demand. It's absolutely record-breaking. Sundar Pichai, who is the CEO of Alphabet, said a couple of weeks ago that demand for tokens, and a token is a little bit like the atomic unit of an AI system, had increased 50-fold in Google over the previous 1 year. So you're seeing an enormous amount of demand for this in enterprise and from consumers. And there really is an acceleration. I mean, Peter described the acceleration. I'll give you some data to show this to you. So the big AI companies release these foundation models, and prior to November 2022, the big companies released one model every 6 months. And ChatGPT gets launched. It turns out that we've found out how to deliver this product, and the model releases have gone to every 2 weeks. But I've excluded all the Chinese companies, and I've excluded all of the models being released in other domains. Foundation models for time series analysis, foundation models for proteomics, foundation models for material science. And the other thing to note here is every one of these X's involves probably an amortized cost at this end of $50 to $100 million, and at this end of $1 to $2 million, sitting on data centers that are progressively bigger. Tens of megawatts here, hundreds over there. And this is triggering that enormous infrastructure cycle that we heard about. And again, just to put it in perspective, back here, 2022, CapEx by the large hyperscalers was already approaching the CapEx of the super majors. And then in comes ChatGPT, and you see the number rise. This is only how much they're spending on GPUs, on Jensen's chips. This makes up about 50 to 60% of total CapEx, because you've got networking, you've got cooling, you've got power, and the buildings themselves. And what you can see is probably by our estimates, by our forecasts, there's sort of $3 to $6 trillion new CapEx emerging as a consequence of this. And every single dollar here translates directly into watts that are required. Down here, those top NVIDIA chips were going to run at 700 watts. By the time you get here, the single racks are 130 kilowatts in a 19-inch rack. I mean, it is a tremendous change, turning into an enormous demand for electricity. And that's given rise to some alarming numbers. And I'm sure we've all seen the IEA's numbers. The one forecast is 800 terawatt hours of incremental AI demand. But let's put some of that into context, okay? So one context here is, of course, we're electrifying and where the world is getting richer. And that's light blue line is air conditioning, data centers, still air conditioning up at 600 or 700 terawatt hours. How do I interpret this number? So it's clearly wrong, not simply because it's from the IEA, but Also because ultimately to deliver this kind of number requires physical equipment, right? It requires transformers, it requires interconnect. And so there are going to be certain constraints on here. But the second reason why it's likely to be wrong is that you've got these multiple exponentials. You've got this exponential, which is the growth in demand from consumers and businesses. You've got a second exponential, which is there's an enormous amount of energy efficiency going into these algorithms and these systems, which is very, very hard to predict. And the third exponential ultimately is going to end up being about how much will industry actually be able to supply. Now, Bloomberg New Energy Finance has come out and said this number by 2030 is going to be 300 to 350, not 1,000, just because of constraints. And I think there's a lot of validity in thinking this will be constrained. But what won't be constrained, and I think Peter made the point very clearly in his presentation, is the absolute demand and the absolute priority and urgency with which the large tech companies, the US government and the Chinese government are going to ensure that AI services get delivered. They will not want these services to be held back by other constraints. And the funny thing about the curves that I deal with in my life, 30 years like Peter in the tech industry, is that they are those compounding curves that turn into those exponentials or those exponential phases. So it's incredibly surprising for me to see a curve that looks like this, which is US electricity consumption per capita going back to 1990. I mean, the Soviet Union was still a country. And you will notice something about this. In my world, this is a flat curve. In my world, nothing has really changed. And the thing that I find quite odd is that ultimately energy is prosperity, right? Energy is health and energy is wealth. And when you look at a curve like this, and it's worse in Germany, it says something about the strategic stance, the posture of a state, of how it looks to the future. And it is so different to this curve, which is how people are moving towards AI. And I think that these curves are going to start to collide. Let me see if I can get it back. Oh, here it is. Right. So what have we got here? What have we got here is fundamentally something that will have to change over the coming years and change really, really dramatically. Partly when I talk to people in the energy space in the US, as I have done this year in Texas and in Florida, I've said, what were you thinking? Like, what were you doing over the last 30 years? Because I can't quite work it out. Last year, I wrote an op-ed for the New York Times, and I made the point that this 19th century technology, which is electricity, will threaten the US's lead in AI, in the deployment of AI. Because ultimately, you need those data centers to serve many, many people. We're only serving 800 million people at a very, very shallow level today. And so what you will have seen in the last few weeks is these Gulf deals, where the US has gone off to build data centers in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia. And they're really anchored on the fact that this is where you can get not kilowatts, not megawatts, but gigawatts, and you can get long-term commitments. But the thing to note is anchored out of Dubai or the UAE or Saudi, within a 100 millisecond ping, you can reach all of Europe. You can serve all of Europe with a chatbot. You can serve all of Europe with agentic AI applications from there. And it's a deeply strategic play. It's a strategic play that for the first time in a while, I think, this world may have more than one and two poles battling it out. There may be an emerging third pole coming out of there because someone has figured out that AI is going to be the infrastructure of the 21st century, and AI requires power, and if we can deliver the power, we'll get the AI and we'll own the infrastructure. The truth is that the demand for all of this, oh, pardon me, I've skipped a slide. Let me go back to here. So I just want to say something about energy efficiency here, which is that set against this is a tremendous amount of energy efficiency. The NVIDIA chips that we've discussed in the past are getting progressively more energy efficient. This is the energy efficiency in flops, operations per watt that's delivered. They are on an upward trajectory, and there are new modalities in the gray. Reversible computing is one, which may actually deliver this processing 10 or 20 times more efficiently than it is today. And the second thing that's true is that outside of hardware energy efficiencies is software optimizations. So the challenge with the deep learning networks we have today, the transformer models, is that for every doubling in the number of AI tokens they serve, they quadruple, naively, the amount of energy that's required. It's a quadratic relationship, which is really unfortunate. If you think back to what Sundar Pichai said, there was a 50-fold increase in Google token usage, which should lead naively to a 2,500-fold increase in energy demand. Of course, there wasn't a 2,500-fold increase in energy demand for two reasons. One is, under the hood, Google is working incredibly hard for software optimizations, order of magnitude optimizations, to make this more efficient. And secondly, just like NVIDIA, Google is working hard to make their hardware more energy efficient. And we will still sit in that nexus of Jevons paradox, which is that demand will go up, but it's not going to go up quite as catastrophically as people, quite as linearly as we might forecast. And that's important because the demands have only just started to get going. You know, we are at the point where how many people here think they spend more than 16 hours a day engaging with their AI systems? Right. So that's not going to be the case in about 10 or 15 years because they will be ambient around us the whole time. How many people have got more than 5,000 AI agents working on their behalf 24/7? Well, that's not going to be the case in 5 years' time, where I'd expect most of the room to put their hand up. So we are at the moment at the cusp of an incredible explosion of demand and use, and we have to be prepared for it. The way I look at this is that it constructs a demand stimulus into the energy system, one that is really driven by customers wanting to pay here and now. And some of this demand stimulus is coming through the demand, solar and batteries for long-term storage. Some of it is restarting diesel generators or gas plants. Some of it are slightly wild and wacky ideas like fusion plants. This is me at the Commonwealth Fusion test reactor. But what you're getting is an incredible demand stimulus from customers, the hyperscalers, who are very, very smart and very, very rich. And that generally is a good thing if you're in the business of supplying power. What we know about the future is that it's going to be much more about AI and technology. We know that because we can see it historically. This is Brussels, 1980, Apple's one of their less successful computers. Back in 1980, 1% of global GDP, or less than, could be allocated towards a technology industry. We were literally in a pre-digital society. By 2025, we're at 15%. And the question to ask yourself is, where do you think that will be in 2030? Will it be back at 1%? Or will it be heading towards 25, 35, 40%? And if it's the latter, what is going to power that? It's going to be electrons. And in the case of Europe, the question is, do you want to be able to provide those electrons, or do you not? So, thank you very much.